I've had my iPhone 13 Pro Max now for a bit over 24 hours, so this is not a full official review, but I did want to get into my first impressions, what's noticeable, what is kind of a letdown, and overall just give you the basic gut reactions after just 24 hours of use. Let's begin. Right, so first of all, I know I was hyping up 120 hertz all year, and I kept saying that's really all I care about in a phone. And you know, now that promotion is finally here, we actually have 120 hertz, I gotta say, it's kinda amazing, and I can't stop looking at it. Literally, I just swipe back and forth on the home screen nonstop, and because it's an OLED display, the response times are so much better. It feels more buttery than the 120 hertz on my iPad Pro even, which I didn't think was possible, but yeah, I loved having the great dynamic range and the insane brightness of the Super Retina XDR display, and I love the high refresh rate of my iPad, so now that they're brought together, oh my god, somehow it exceeded my expectations, which I really didn't think was possible, because I had extremely high hopes for how good 120 hertz would look, and then the moment I saw it, oh my god, my eyes melted, and now everything that's not 120 hertz is becoming more abundantly obvious and somewhat frustrating, so I will just non-stop keep using my phone for nothing, you know? I'll just be swiping around, scrolling, doing basic things, and I'm in love with 120 hertz all over again. I thought I was a big fan of it way back in 2017 when Apple first introduced it, and now I'm a big fan of it again. And I've missed it ever since I've reviewed any Android phone that's had it. I see a lot of people saying, all these features people are excited about were already on other Android phones. Yeah, go back, hold me accountable to this. Find every phone I've reviewed with Android that has a higher than 60 hertz refresh rate. I bring it up, and I say I love it. Okay, this is not a double standard here. It's not that I didn't care about 120 hertz before and I only care about it now because Apple did it. It was by far probably one of the most headlining perks of every Android phone I've reviewed of the past few years. I gave all kinds of credit wherever credit was due. The difference, of course, is I'm an Apple sheep, and a lot of us want smartphones that hold their resale value and get 7 to 8 years of software updates and fit within the most superior tech ecosystem. So now that we have the high refresh rate on our phone that we can actually incorporate into everything, that's what makes a big difference. Anyway, the other substantial thing I discovered with the 13 Pro Max is that I do not really care about the notch shrinking. It's finally happened. It feels weird after all these years of the notch being the same size, but now I'm seeing people complain that all of the content creators that started filming in 2x1 because they thought that would be a better aspect ratio for notched phones. Now, because the notch has grown in height a little bit, it's starting to cut in on people's YouTube videos. For the record, I tried to warn everybody about this. This was the specific reason I have always still recorded my videos in 16:9. It's because I knew notches and camera holes and stuff, they all change, and it's silly to try to adjust your aspect ratios dependent on the aspect ratio of the phone that year, because that's always going to be ever changing and companies can't agree on aspect ratios. So because video thumbnails are 16:9, that's why I still record in 16:9. It's still the most massively adopted standard, and I think it needs to stay that way. But hilariously, despite the smaller notch, the icons at the top of the phone feel obnoxiously large. Like, it's become comedic that Apple totally could add the battery percentage back, and they just don't because they don't feel like it. But when I was using my iPhone 12 mini for 10 months, and I was used to the widgets up there being really, really small, but still, you know, you could read them and you can tell what they were trying to say. Now, going to the 13 Pro Max, they don't need to be that big, and they certainly could fill some more information up there if they felt like it, maybe just for the sake of minimalism and simplicity. They don't want to, but smaller notch, don't care. And moving forward, I don't think there's anything Apple could do with the display that would get me to upgrade. The brightness is fantastic, the size is great. I do miss having a small phone, but I've already gotten very comfortable with the massive, most heaviest iPhone ever. You just gotta have to two-hand that piece of glass a tad more often. The other downside I'm noticing within the first 24 hours is the camera bump is quite massive, and that starts to feel a bit clunky when you're like me and you don't use phone cases, because I set my phone down on tables in my desk all the time, and because the camera bump is so large, it wobbles a lot, and it does look quite obnoxious to set a phone down and have it leaning to one side because the camera bump is so big. It makes complete sense as to why they keep it there, because I understand like 80% or more of smartphone owners use a case anyway, so the camera bump probably isn't that big a deal for most people, but I'm not interested in getting a case. This phone is so huge already already. I don't need to make it any bigger, and I honestly don't think Apple's gonna somehow magically remove the bump next year. As much as I hope they do, and that would be great, I don't think it's gonna happen. The phone is so heavy though, it's become clunky in my smartphone holder in my car. What I used to be able to just throw my 12 mini in and it was fine just staying there. Now it like will not hold itself up and it continues to fall down whenever I drive over a bump or turn too hard. So I might have to buy some new accessories for the car just to mount it properly. Anyway, the weight is not that big a deal for my pockets or my hands, but just accessories, and the camera bump is a bit of an obtrusion. But that's enough with the negative. I want to focus a tad more on the positive things. Macro mode is way more fun than I thought. I've seen it before and tried it in other Android phones, but now it just feels so much more rich and very high quality, how much detail you can get out of really, really tiny objects. And I love just looking at little things across the office or in the house. I was even visiting my grandmother yesterday who had all of these little ceramic knickknacks that she was laying out, and I told her I got a new phone. Let's see how much detail this macro mode can pull out of this little ceramic duck, and the picture probably makes it look a lot bigger than it really is. That duck that you're seeing is like 1/5 the size of a penny, and yet the 13 Pro Max is able to pull so much data and so much detail out of that. And I knew that it was a rumored feature, but I just wasn't expecting to have this much fun with it. It even works for 4K at 60 video recording, which is going to be super helpful for me when I'm filming tech products or want to get a close-up on something. Just the fact that you can basically throw your camera right up to the surface of anything and still remain in focus is awesome. And honestly, I don't care that much about the phone automatically switching to ultra wide when you get close to something. I think that makes total sense because they would much rather you at a certain distance have the shot in focus than stay on the standard lens and be out of focus. So Apple has said they're going to change that in the future, but still, I don't get what the big upset with that is. It makes total sense that Apple would want to make things as seamless and simple to the point that, yeah, if you just hold your phone close to something, it switches to the ultra wide because that's the macro camera. Now that we've had 3x telephoto returned, I'm also not terribly impressed. Like, the aperture is still not super low, so there's a bit more grain with telephoto, and I still find myself in situations where the lighting isn't good enough, so Apple ends up just digitally zooming on the main lens instead of just actually opting for the telephoto. But the only reason they do that is because the telephoto is still not that good. Even if it's 3x, sure, the zoom is far better than before, and for the last 10 months, my phone hasn't had a telephoto lens, so you'd think I would care and love to have it back, and I just don't find myself in a ton of circumstances where the 3x is super duper useful, which sounds weird because I used to say the same thing about ultra wide before, but maybe quarantine and being at home all day has resulted in me not wanting to zoom in as much. I mean, it's good to have, not saying we need to scrap telephoto, I'm just saying, I didn't really miss it. Now that it's back, I'm like, okay, who cares? LiDAR also not super helpful at all, and I'm still kind of thinking is a pointless sensor given cinematic mode is available on the iPhone 13 and 13 mini. But that of course brings me to what I'm sure everyone has already guessed in the comment sections. Yes, today's video is entirely recorded off of the iPhone 13 Pro Max, the audio and the video. And I'm using cinematic mode, which is pretty dang good in my opinion for this exact use case. If you're using it for YouTube videos where you're just kind of talking to the camera a lot, I do actually think the artificial blurring does a decent job at masking out edges, and I haven't had as much experience with objects, but I'm still pretty impressed with how algorithms and machine learning can rack focus between things. It does a lot of guessing and a lot of focus searching, but specifically for when you're just pointing the camera at someone and you're just trying to have a cinematic looking YouTube video like this, I think it does a pretty dang good job. And I'm annoyed that it's still locked at 1080 at 30 because obviously it would look far better if you could record at 4K, but I'm actually a tad bummed out that cinematic mode requires Dolby Vision because a lot of the lighting I've been experimenting with on cinematic mode typically brings out too much light in the background and not enough on my face, which I've had to rearrange my studio lights in here just a bit to account for that, and oftentimes I am adjusting the exposure settings when I'm editing this video in Final Cut just because I don't like the compressed look that Dolby Vision has when it's exported via standard dynamic range. And when you try to put full HDR Dolby Vision into Final Cut, it breaks it, and you gotta get an HDR monitor to edit that type of thing. So I'm just not really a fan of the whole extreme dynamic range thing, because it always comes across to me as the phone just having to be overly bright or overly dark to showcase just slightly more range, but it doesn't really result in that different of an image. So I personally wish you could have cinematic mode without Dolby Vision, and hopefully the lighting would be a tad more balanced. And of course, yeah, 60 frames a second 4K, that would be nicer. But I'm super duper excited to try out ProRes once that feature is available. It's gonna take up a lot of space, but I really want to see what like uncompressed video from an iPhone looks like, because I've been looking at compressed video for a while and kind of tired of it, kind of sick of it. But I can do lots of comparisons in the future with cinematic mode if you guys are interested. But overall, I think that summarizes my first impressions. I still want USB-C on the iPhone though, especially if it's going to be recording, you know, dozens and dozens of gigabytes of video files. Having even a Thunderbolt connector is not that crazy if you're going to have to be transferring, you know, 60 gigs off of your iPhone to edit with regularly. So I know that sounds crazy, but what do you guys think of the 13 Pro Max so far? Feel free to let me know down below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.